hurricane. Casey Jones, you better watch your speed. Trouble ahead, trouble behind. And know that notion just crossed my mind. It's so
Hello? Hey, Chris, what's up, man? How's it going?
What's your problem, Steven?
I don't believe in problems, but what's your problem, man?
All the files are corrupted. We don't have a movie.
Wait a second. What are you talking about? Our files for the media project?
Yeah, I can't open it. I can't edit. I can't review anything. We're done.
We're done?
We're getting a 50 boy. At least, at most, we're getting a 50. You see good things, slap equal to 0. We got nothing. Split out.
So we're pretty much going to summer school, right?
We are 100%. I'm 100% positive we're going to summer school.
What do we do at this point then?
We just kind of sit here and enjoy the time we have before we hit summer school.
You know, I'm gonna call you later, man. I gotta just wallow this up and realize that I'm going to summer school for a freaking media project. Thanks a lot.
Well, tell your mom I said hi.
Why do you care about my mom? Jesus!
your speed. Trouble ahead.
Freaking media project, I'm school for life, man. Freaking school for life. I'm done for life, man. I'm done. Man, I don't know what's gonna happen anymore. I just don't know. I'm done. I'm done. I'm so done for life. I don't know what is gonna go happen right now. I might as well tell my mom I'm gonna drop out. I'm not going to high school anymore. Screw this, man. I'm done. Whatever. Oh, I'm so screwed, man.
Hey,
Oh, hi, Jen.
you look down. What's the problem?
I'm in a serious amount of trouble, Jennifer. My media project got deleted and corrupted, and if I don't finish another movie within 8 hours, I'm going to fail senior year, and I'm going to go to summer school, and I don't want that.
What's your media project about?
Oh, my video is about Brown versus Board of Education, that landmark Supreme Court case in 1954.
Brown versus Board of Education? What's that?
Whoa. You're 20 years old, and you're in college, yet you can't tell me what Brown versus Board of Education is? How are you in college?
At least I'm in college.
Whatever you say, Jen.
What's the background of Brown versus Board?
Brown versus Board of Education was a landmark Supreme Court case in 1954. This Supreme Court case was a consolidation of 5 other court cases that the Supreme Court agreed to hear. This court case established that public segregation in schools is unconstitutional. This court case actually overturned the previous Supreme Court ruling known as Plessy versus Ferguson, and that took place in 1896.
Plessy versus Ferguson?
Yes, but in order to understand Plessy versus Ferguson, you need to go back in time a little. The Declaration of Independence stated that all men were created equal, right? Well, during the Civil War, this was hard to believe, when African Americans were kept captive by slave owners. However, in 1865, the 13th Amendment was passed, and that made slavery illegal. In 1868, the 14th Amendment was passed, and that established 2 very important clauses, the Due Process Clause and the Equal Protection Clause. The Due Process Clause establishes that no person may be deprived of life, liberty, or property without legal proceedings in court. And the Equal Protection Clause pretty much guarantees citizens of the U.S. equal protection of the laws. no person may be deprived of their liberties and freedoms as guaranteed in the U.S. Constitution. Even though these amendments existed, African Americans were treated badly, and until 1870, the 15th Amendment was passed, and that pretty much denied states from denying people the right to vote regardless of their race. Even though these laws existed, African Americans were still treated pretty badly. In fact, state legislatures actually began segregating public facilities such as restrooms, bathrooms, schools, transportation systems, etc. These laws were known as Jim Crow laws. It wasn't until 1892 that a man named Homer Plessy decided to challenge his arrest in court. He was arrested for refusing to give up his seat to a white man in New Orleans. However, in 1896, the Supreme Court ruled against him 8-1 and decided that segregation was not a violation of his rights. In Plessy v. Ferguson, they decided and established the separate but equal clause.
What's separate but equal?
Separate but equal pretty much established that as long as states were not denying African Americans public needs such as water, food, healthcare, and so on, that they were not in violation of the Constitution. They found that as long as states were providing these needs along the line of segregation, that they were legally able to do so.
Why wasn't it unconstitutional?
To answer that question, I'll explain Brown v. Board of Education a little better. Brown v. Board of Education is the name given to 5 cases that the Supreme Court decided to hear based on segregation in public schools. Each of these 5 cases were sponsored by the NAACP and Thurgood Marshall. The NAACP stands for National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. Thurgood Marshall argued against the Supreme Court that segregation was a violation of the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. He argued that education was not being fully achieved due to segregation. In 1952, the Supreme Court decided to hear these arguments, but had to rehear for a second time because the justices had such a varied opinion on segregation. However, in 1954, they finally decided that separate but equal had no place in the Equal Protection Clause, and they decided against it, ruling that segregation in public schools was unconstitutional. To understand the Supreme Court hearing, we have a concept known as stare decisis. Stare decisis literally means let the decision stand. The Supreme Court pretty much decides to hear previous cases that they decided, and they make precedents set it by it.
Were schools integrated after this?
Unfortunately, no. Not many people were happy with the decision of the Supreme Court. In fact, many riots and protests occurred. One particular event was known as the Little Rock Crisis. Little Rock High School is located in Arkansas. Basically, the governor of Arkansas was not happy with the Supreme Court ruling and decided to refuse to let kids into the school. This caused a protest and violence outside of the school. This is when President Eisenhower decided to send in national troops to intervene and to make sure that they enforced the new Supreme Court ruling.
Why was this the beginning of the end of discrimination?
The reason why this was the beginning to the end of discrimination is simply because it gave context to the meanings of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. It is understandable to believe that any person in the U.S. would have equal protection of their rights, regardless of their race, sex, or age. After the Supreme Court ruling, kids were happy to know that they could attend school together without fear of breaking the law because of their race. In fact, many schools had to either integrate their schools or close down. Racial segregation pretty much established a line between white and colored students, and this is still considered a way of discrimination. Denying kids their right to education just because of their color is simply unjust, and it violates the Equal Protection Clause. And after the Supreme Court ruling was handed down, people were happy to know that kids were given an equal opportunity in education.
Wow, now I see why this movie is complicated.
Yeah, I really don't know how to make this project into a movie. It just takes so much time for 8 hours, you know? Well, now you understand Brown v. Board of Education.
Tell you what, why don't we make the movie right now?
Wow, why didn't I think of that? Thank you.
No problem, let's go.